You know, unbeknownst to many of us Americans, there actually are other countries in the world. Shocking, I know. And the reaction from citizens in other countries to the fall of American democracy is fascinating because unlike us, they actually seem to take what's happening to us seriously, and they seem to worry about our descent into complete totalitarianism. And I want to take some time to share their opinions with you because even though many Americans might be growing numb to the insanity that's ensuing on a daily basis, individuals with an outside perspective are not growing numb. In fact, they are appalled. For example, a German YouTuber named Feli, who's living in the United States, asked her audience about their thoughts on Trump's rise in the United States after she got a lot of requests from her audience to talk about what Germans think about the current situation here. Now, to give you some context, this is a YouTuber that typically makes more lighthearted content about cultural differences between Germany and the United States, so she's not necessarily overtly political, but her German audience was not afraid to share their thoughts on Trump, and spoiler alert, they are terrified at what they're witnessing.
The first thing that stood out to me was that out of the over 250 responses, many of which consisted of several paragraphs, by the way, a very large number of them included words like worried, fear, frightened, alarming, scary, or unsettling. One person wrote, "I feel uneasy and slightly frightened. Uneasy when I think about the domestic political consequences of polarization within the US population, frightened when I think about the geopolitical implications. Geopolitically, I'm concerned about who is positioning themselves as the new world power and what that means for me in Germany and Europe. In terms of US domestic politics, I fear decades of noticeable negative effects on democracy in the US. Could it lead to civil war? Will the US become similar to The Handmaid's Tale under Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance?" And I think this is one of the most prevalent themes among the responses I received. A lot of people talked about how democracy in the US seems to be under attack. Trump has only been president for 6 months, but the US is already on the path to becoming a totalitarian state. I have serious doubts as to whether there will even be elections in 3 years, and if so, in what conditions. The treatment of tourists and even green card holders at the borders is unimaginable and frightening. Seeing how Trump is silencing the media, how he's openly threatening to revoke the citizenship of US citizens, how research is being brought into line, and above all, how people are being arbitrarily arrested on the street just to meet arrest quotas fills me with great concern. The United States of America is on the path from democracy to an authoritarian state. Project 2025, which I read part of, is being implemented word for word. Many people, especially those who are less well off, and women, will lose their freedoms, and in the worst case, their health and their lives. Welcome to Gilead. Another reference to Handmaid's Tale. A real separation of powers no longer exists. People are being thrown into prison or deported without due process, even when there is a court order against it. Democracy is truly in danger. Freedom of speech is at risk when Trump sues newspapers, when they're excluded from press conferences and publicly shamed by Trump. It's horrible. The problem is that hate speech and normalization of almost fascist rhetoric is now totally acceptable. In a Jubilee interview, one guy was proud to say, "Yes, I am a fascist and I don't care being called a Nazi." And that's all because of Trump's rhetoric. Shocking, terrifying, dumbfounding. And as a German who spent 2 years of history class in school solely on Third Reich and the Second World War, it's also so scarily predictable. The patterns are there.
Her video was fascinating. I would highly encourage you to watch the entire thing, just from start to finish. It was fascinating, but that really shocked me, not because I was necessarily surprised by the responses, but because the level of empathy that her viewers expressed towards Americans was really heartwarming. Even though we did this to ourselves by electing a fascist twice, they still care about what happens to us. They could be like, fuck Americans, this is the bed that they made for themselves, so now they have to lie in it, but they didn't have that response. And I wish that Americans cared about Americans as much as non-Americans seem to care about Americans. But as an American myself, I've seen the cruelty firsthand. I have family members who knowingly voted against their own self-interest to spite people that they view as inferior to them. But that's the thing about fascism. It centers on the elimination of their common enemy, who they view as the biggest threat to society and their own existence. And Germans understand this better than anybody, and they know how slow and steady the creep of fascism is, and how it happens, and how it really starts by demonizing one group, and then it spreads, and other groups become the target. And on that note, Feli explains explains how out of the 250 plus responses that she received from her audience, only 5 of them were supportive of Donald Trump. There were people who said, please don't even do this video, Feli, because you live in the United States and it might not be safe for you to speak out right now. And a common theme among her German viewers was just how strikingly similar 2025 America is to Hitler's Germany. I'm not kidding. Like, they all brought this up on their own volition, and what they said was chilling.
Do Germans see any parallels to 1930s Germany? And the answer is yes, many Germans definitely do. In this survey alone, I received dozens of answers that mentioned this. Feels like Germany in the 1930s. Nobody is welcome, only if you have money, and the change is so rapid that most people don't understand what's happening. If anyone is wondering how the Nazis were able to come to power in 1933, observe closely. The state is being turned into a fascist idiocracy, controlling large parts of the media, defaming critics, enriching themselves, and cutting people's healthcare. And the majority of the population seems to be completely okay with it or doesn't dare to disagree. My dad is over 90 years old and tells me that he hears the same kind of rhetoric now from the White House as he heard from the Nazis as a little boy. I'm sad and terrified. I never thought the US would ever head towards a dictatorship, but here we go. When I was younger, I always dreamed of living in the US, or at least saw the US as the ideal country of wealth and living your dream life. However, now that I'm grown up, it changed to the literal opposite. I definitely don't want to live in the US anymore, or even go there anytime soon. With Trump's election, I see a country drifting further and further in a direction reminiscent of Nazi Germany in the 1930s. Boogeymen are being established, illegal immigrants, and dealt with harshly. Again and again, I see supposed ICE agents brutally arresting people. Thoughts of the Gestapo come to mind. I hope that this madness can still be stopped, but the damage has already been done. Government institutions have been de facto dissolved, important personnel dismissed. Educational institutions are being pressured, and books that are ideologically unacceptable are being banned or removed from classrooms. The US is moving further and further away from its ideal of a free country and, in my eyes, is already an autocracy. As a historian, what's been happening since January sends a shiver down my spine. Harassment, persecution, and deportation of migrants, control of universities, influence over the media. The end of late-night TV? What the frick? It's reminiscent of 1933. With his statement that journalists who criticize him are, quote, enemies of the people, Trump has clearly shown that he thinks like a fascist. My father, born in Karlsruhe, was a half-Jewish child Holocaust victim in concentration camps. He lost his entire family on his Jewish side. My mother was a Catholic Swabian girl from Augsburg. So many of the things we see in the US happened in Germany in the 1930s. Everything we hear about, I heard from my Oma, my grandma, already. Her Jewish friends disappearing, the local Metzger, Jewish, being taken by people and deported, socialist friends sent to Dachau. My husband is Italian, from Rome, and people in the US always think he's Mexican. He travels everywhere with his US passport so he can show his papers.
So the answer is yes. Germans do see parallels between the United States currently and Nazi Germany. And on that note, she also looked at public opinion polls in Germany to further gauge how Germans feel about Donald Trump. And she shared this poll to show that the overwhelming majority of the German population, like many people in Europe, they have a negative view of Donald Trump. But the percentage of older Germans opposed to Donald Trump is even higher, which makes sense since this is a generation that likely grew up hearing stories from their parents and grandparents about the Third Reich. Although there is a small percentage of Germans who actually views the United States more positively since Trump took office. And that same percentage is the number of people who support Germany's AfD party, which is the modern day Nazi party. Now, there's no evidence that these are the same people. She points this out because we're talking about two different polls, but it's an interesting coincidence. And odds are, I would guess that the people who are viewing the U.S. more positively now also happen to be sympathetic towards AfD. Furthermore, she talks about German media and says that all media outlets, including conservative populist outlets, they are all critical of Donald Trump, but the couple of exceptions are outlets that explicitly praise AfD. So her viewers aren't wrong to compare Trump's rise to Hitler's, and the fact that Germany's modern-day Nazi party supports him, It says a lot, we'll put it that way. And I would highly, again, encourage you to watch her full video because it is very, very illuminating. And it's also cathartic to know that people around the world aren't as brain damaged as Americans, in part because they're not subjected to nonstop propaganda every single day. But it's not just Germans who are alarmed at what's happening in the United States. It's almost everyone else in the world with a few exceptions. And we're going to look at polls here in a moment, but first, I want to share how British people reacted when they were asked by a street interviewer whether or not they would move to the United States in 2025. As you're going to see, they did not hesitate to say, no way.
Would you move to America in 2025?
No, never, no.
No interest in moving there. It's a complete hole.
No, because I am transgender.
You'd step over there and you already lose like 10 of the rights that you have here.
It's a disgusting place. They've got no NHS whatsoever. It's an absolute dump.
They just think they're the best. They're like, oh my God, we have freedom, but most other countries have freedom.
I don't like the culture, whether it's tipping, guns, the thoughts on abortion.
If you're dying or having a baby, why you got to pay for it?
There's nothing about America that I think I would prefer over here.
You don't have like free speech at all there.
I wouldn't last a minute over there, I don't think. It's definitely stricter over there than it is over here.
Damn. They know that they would immediately lose so much more rights if they chose to move to the United States. They know that they could die if they don't have health insurance because that's the way our system is. They have NHS. They have so much more social safety net programs that Americans don't have. So they know that life in the United States is much more difficult than it is for British people. That's not to say that they don't have their problems as well. In fact, they have a lot of problems. British people are currently experiencing some of the things that we are. You know, their government is supporting Israel's genocide of Palestinians. They're instituting online censorship. Trans rights are being eradicated. But the difference between the UK and the US is that their democratic institutions aren't being undermined. Therefore, all of the bad things that's happening to them can theoretically be undone by a different government. I mean, they can't take back the deaths that their policies have caused. But if Jeremy Corbyn's party, for example, were to be elected, he could theoretically reverse all of the terrible things that Keir Starmer's government is doing. And he could do that through democratic means, which is important. Whereas in the United States, a lot of the changes that Trump is making are unilateral. And they're irreversible since they're not being done democratically. The only way to undo everything that Trump is doing right now would be for some Democratic president to come along and exercise a greater amount of authoritarian control than he's exercising right now. And that's assuming that we have free and fair elections going forward. But I mean, relying on the benevolence of a different dictator doesn't give me much hope, and it certainly doesn't bode well for democracy, obviously. You can't put the cat back in the bag once you take it out, which is why our situation is uniquely bleak. But with regard to that video, it's not just that Brits wouldn't want to move to the United States. People from other countries, they are afraid to travel here altogether. And this is what the overwhelming majority of Feli's viewers said in response to a poll that she posted when she asked if they would travel here. 71% said no, 17% said that they would, but they would be afraid, and just a small percentage said that they wouldn't, that they would. But there's also other international travel subreddits where so many people are asking about whether or not it's safe to travel altogether to the United States right now. For example, this Redditor asked fellow UK tourists if they've had any problems with ICE when they've traveled to the United States after seeing articles about European tourists getting detained. This Australian Redditor asked if it's safe for his parents to travel to the US, prefacing the question by saying that his parents are Caucasian and have no visible tattoos, knowing that they could be targeted if they're not white and have tattoos. This German Redditor asked others about whether or not they should go ahead with the trip that they were planning to the US since they're now feeling pretty uneasy about what's happening. And someone in the Ask Ireland subreddit asked for others' experiences while traveling to the US and if they had any problems. But keep in mind that these are just a couple of examples. There were many, many more that I didn't share with you. And the answers that they got really varied depending on the subreddit. Some people said that they traveled to the US and didn't have a problem. So they said, you know, the person asking the question would probably be fine. Others shared how they were actually interrogated by ICE and were terrified. Others said don't come if you have a criminal record, or recommended canceling their trips if they were able to and still get their money back. And then there's also concerns about them looking through their phone and if they see anti-Trump sentiment and how that's going to bode well for them entering the United States that they talked about. And, you know, it's totally possible that if you were to travel to the US right now, you'd be fine. Like, you'll notice that things are different, obviously, but it'd be similar if you went to other authoritarian countries like Turkey or Hungary. But one thing that's clear is that not enough people think that it's worth it to even risk it at this point, hence why tourism is down across the country, and it's particularly hurting communities whose economies rely on international tourism, like Las Vegas, for example. And this mini documentary from the Associated Press explains how the fall in international tourism has been devastating for this city. And that's just one of many U.S. cities experiencing the same thing. And the fall of international tourism offers us a glimpse into how the rest of the world is feeling about the United States right now. They really don't want anything to do with us, either because they don't want to support our policies by giving us their money, or because they feel afraid that they're going to be targeted if they come to this country. And a Pew survey finds that confidence in the United States has fallen off of a cliff since Donald Trump took power. When it comes to whether or not respondents have confidence in Donald Trump to do the right thing regarding world affairs, the overwhelming majority of people in most countries said that they have no confidence in Donald Trump, excluding a few notable exceptions like Hungary, India, Israel, Nigeria, and Kenya. In fact, U.S. favorability has declined in most countries, with the biggest swings coming from countries like Mexico, our neighbor, for obvious reasons. But in countries like Israel and Turkey, sentiment towards the United States has actually improved. In other words, in other countries with fascist and or genocidal leaders, India, Turkey, Israel, and Hungary, they all support fascism here in the United States too. Whereas everyone else in countries that haven't completely succumbed to fascism, they think we're fucking insane. Rightfully so. So as an American, it is fascinating to see how other people react to the sheer lunacy of the United States. It honestly makes me feel more insane, since every other person in the United States seemingly has turned into an ape-brained MAGA dipshit, and it really has created this cynicism in me that I never had before. So to have this validation from other people, and to know that, like, most people are good, and my perception is just like unique to the United States, it's good. It's good to get that validation, right? Although I hope that international viewers who happen to stumble across this video, they take what happens here as a warning sign. And I say this because fascism isn't unique to the United States, obviously. This is a global movement that materialized in direct response to the failure of capitalism around the world. And a lot of countries who are looking at the United States in horror right now have burgeoning fascist movements of their own. So I hope that they learn from our mistakes here and do everything that they possibly can to stop this virus before it infects their countries too. Because it might already be too late for us here in the United States, but it's not too late for everybody else in the world. And as bleak as the situation is here in the United States, my hope is that it'll at least serve as a much needed wake-up call to everybody else in the world. Don't let this happen in your countries too, please.